Recorded.
So I'm ready.
Yeah, far away.
Law and jurisdiction is more to do with interaction between men than anything else. Everybody is bound by their own law and their own jurisdiction. And that means that I can't force a law or an agreement onto you that you haven't agreed to. Interaction between men is before that aspect. Throughout history, going really early, when two people interacted with each other and they made an agreement and one person didn't abide by that agreement, it ended up causing physical injuries. Once more people started getting established into groups, it caused wars. It's that interaction between men of being able to have that higher capacity in yourself and in your mind to understand that it's our agreements that make everything what it is. English law is only using a tiny fraction of natural law and the interaction between men. The issue comes in because we're looking at an entire planet bound by English law that don't know it. So ignorance and agreements plays a big part in all of this, because you can make an agreement out of ignorance, but you can't break it out of ignorance. The reason for that is because then I can't read your mind and you can't read mine, so I don't know if you know what I'm talking about or not unless you actually say, hey, I don't understand that, you have to explain it to me more. The issue comes in with ignorance and breaking agreements. You can't even have agreements or a law if ignorance is allowed to break it, because at any time anybody can just say, hey, okay, no, I was ignorant, and that's it. So taking the fact how people like to take the easy way out and everything else, to allow something like that to happen would basically bring us back before the Stone Age. This is a capacity in mind that the human race acquired thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. For some reason, this aspect is being overlooked by almost every single person that I ever talked to. It seems that it is okay to break something out of ignorance just because somebody didn't tell you something or something like that, when you can actually just go and discuss it, find out what you didn't actually know at the time, and you can terminate it. That's why laws are not written in stone. So the remedy to get out of these agreements, which are really our interaction between each other, all we have to do is go and discuss that agreement and renegotiate it. And if you want to terminate it, you can terminate it. There is no law saying you can't terminate agreements. So there is no need to even look at ignorance now and allow something like that into interaction between men, when everybody already has the right, no matter how ignorant they were when they got into that contract, that they can renegotiate it and even terminate it if they choose, right? As long as they're gonna do it properly, right? Not try to ignore it, right? Or abandon it, or right, say you can't do that because you didn't tell me. That is basically a baby saying, hey, I didn't know that happened. Well, I guess then by you learning this, you kind of grew up a little bit more, and now you're able to take care of yourself a little bit more. When you decide to actually take care of yourself, now that you know about that, and you're going to start doing that, now you can act. Now you're growing up, because that's right. Just like when we're growing up, if you didn't brush your teeth and blah blah blah, right? You didn't get to do other things. Well, this is basically the exact same thing, except for on a. It's even way before that, even before walking and talking, because even the words that we use, we're all in agreement on what those mean because it's in a dictionary, right? Because we're a group of people. So it's the interaction between men that is really holding everything together, and why even when there's an agreement that is completely unlawful, it's different if that agreement is truly unlawful between a couple of people or even a half a dozen people. But when you're talking about a completely unlawful agreement that has the entire world hooked up into it, you can't really allow something like that to happen, because that's the Armageddon that I believe the English law and the people in the function of government are actually speaking about, because what would occur with the current beliefs of what everybody has right now to what this really is, which is opposite, right? Because everybody believes that we can break those agreements and abandon them. So that's kind of the biggest part, is that we're everybody's bound by their own law and their own jurisdiction, and I can't force my agreement onto somebody who hasn't had that agreement. So that was what brings us into the part where you have, if somebody else injures you, you have to go to their jurisdiction and use their law against them as your remedy. Just like if you did something to them in their jurisdiction, and you're not in their jurisdiction and you have different laws than them, they have to find out what law you're bound by. Because your agreement isn't between him. You have no agreement. Your agreements are to your jurisdiction, to what you've agreed to do for you in your territory, right? So when two territories collide, this is that conflicts in. It's called conflict in law, and it's private international law specifically deals with this. You can get the books on omnipotence. And then that transfers into law of property. So law of property is more of an assumed area of law that is granted by private international law. So by looking at private international law and the conflict of laws will help you to understand law of domicile a lot better. So between the interaction of men and the fact that I can't force my law onto you and force you into my jurisdiction, because that's what everybody's trying to say, is like, there is no contract, you can't force me into that jurisdiction, and you can't force that law onto me. But then everybody's turning around and saying that I have to abide by their law, even though I didn't agree with it, and they won't even look at what my law is. So as soon as you come across somebody that's doing that, you already know that they don't have a clue what's going on. Because when we look at the true interactions between men and what agreements are, and how this is all playing out, and also what English law did to it, right? Because it's a natural law that you're bound to your territory, right? Like if you're an elephant, you can't live in Antarctica. You see what I'm getting at? So you're bound by your territory. So that elephant is bound by its territorial rules, right? Just like other animals, they can't go to other jurisdictions in law because they're gonna die. So nature took care of them, right? We are one of the only animals on this planet that can actually be nomadic in the way that we can go and either live in Africa or we can live in Antarctica. So because we've actually breached those lines of nature, right? We're in a class of natural subject on their own, where now our interactions, any law that we make between each other, they're a fiction, because we've already created a fiction outside of nature. So that's why every time that any man makes an agreement, it's fiction, because it's not nature. right? So either it's nature or it's fiction. All man laws are fiction, so that's why it requires you to agree with it, right? And not dealing with the group aspect yet, but that's basically how jurisdictions and the interaction between men and everything is happening. So we can see that the estates in reversion and what we're doing, we're following all law because we have to. Anytime we run into anybody, the first question you should be asking them is, hey, where do you live? What do you do for a living? Right? Because then that's going to tell us everything we need to know about that individual. Right? What laws they're bound by and everything else. We'll know what we have to be careful of with them because of what they understand and what they believe. So, as you can see, this carry-ons into so many other areas that conflict deals with to make sure that the interaction between men always stays intact. So we're not actually using any equitable law in estates in reversion for ourselves. We're not using any common law in estates in reversion for ourselves. We are using the natural law for ourselves. The equitable laws restrict the government and those in fee simple. The common law restricts the monarchy and the corporeal hereditaments to make sure that you can get your natural estate back. So that's how. That's the reason why so many people think that we actually are using these laws as ours, but we're not, because we're not claiming them as our law. Because we're not claiming that we are bound by them, we're claiming that you are bound by them, and you can't do that to me because of the jurisdiction that I am in. Right? These are capacities in law where everybody else thinks we're talking about titles, right? Because everybody's like, well, I'm not interested in land and I'd just rather have a certificate. Well, that's another title, right? All these things are titles that people want to deal in, and that's all fee simple and being subject to the monarchy. So this estates in reversion is recognizing people for their proper jurisdiction and using their laws against them to make sure that they can't infringe and abridge your rights for what they're doing right now, because we've accepted to allow that to happen. Right? So, any questions on that?
Not from me.
Any of the new guys? Carolyn? No?
Does anyone want to add anything before I finish this one regarding interactions between men?
They might be on mute, eh?
Oh, she's typing.
Well, really, the English law is a protector for the donor, so it's like a catch-22. You know, we don't want to be a part of it, but at the same time, it's actually the best thing for society as it's starting to grow up or starting to learn who they are. So I mean, they got their own safety net by saying, well, we're actually protecting you from your own self, and it's not our fault that you're ignorant about it.
Well said, David. Well said. Bang on. And Carolyn, she was saying Stu has a question. I think you're on mute, Carolyn. You can just unmute and say it.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on.
Okay, Carolyn, remember that question. We're just going to continue, and as soon as you're ready to fire that question out.
I have the question now. Please, Stu. Ask the question, Stu.
In a courtroom, can you just tell a judge, I don't follow your law, I don't consent to your law, I follow natural law, and that they can't prosecute? Is it that simple?
No, unfortunately, it's not that simple. Equitable courts can't see or determine common law at all. Not until you actually have a deed of release and you've taken that to the common law courts of your jurisdiction to actually get it confirmed is the only way to make sure that equity can never hassle you again.
So we need to get a deed of release.
That's a release because you have a vested right in these things. Your release is actually done as soon as you give a recognized release and it says the proper things and you're dealing with the proper things in the release, right? Because if you're saying you're trying to release the moon from the Earth's orbit, that ain't gonna work too well, right? So if you're releasing the proper things and it's stating the proper things and you're talking about the land, if you're talking about the proper things, as soon as that release is sent in, they have to accept it. It's when if they don't send you that confirmation after so long, you can actually take it to the court and force it, right? And there is no injury with the government against you unless you've given that release, and then they still try to come after you after you've given the release. So let's say today you went and stole a loaf of bread, and tomorrow you give your release. From how I understand it, is because you stole the loaf of bread before that release, right? They're still gonna look at you that you stole that bread, right? So if you gave the release, if you give your release today, you don't have to steal bread. You can go write a writ of waste and take it to the court and get it. You see it? You kind of see what I'm getting at? So the people that are stealing, the people that are stealing and all that, and doing all those things within equity that is against the law of equity, the only reason why it's against the law of equity is because you're not standing as the donor, right? Because you don't need to steal when you're the donor, because all you have to do is write a writ of waste, because everything that everybody has in fee simple, they don't own it, and they're holding it for all the donors, right? So that doesn't mean that when you get out, if you're the only donor on the planet, that doesn't mean you own everything on the planet, right? As more donors come out, everybody, because in reality, we're all still here. So you don't own the whole planet. It's the same thing as a group, right? Everybody that's not a part of English law, that's in their natural capacity, they would all own the planet evenly and equally as one, right? There are no difference. There's no Indians, there's no black people, there's no Chinese people, there's no nothing. We all the same. So when somebody comes walking out of the bush and they're dying because they've been on such a long trip and they haven't had any food, it's up to you to make sure that you feed them. Because if you don't feed them, they're going to have to attack you, right? So you feed them and help them. But that doesn't mean you do that for the rest of their life, right? If they're not willing to learn what they need to learn to fish for themselves and take care of themselves, then it's up, right? I helped you as far as you needed. You're doing fine now. Take some food, since you don't want to be a part of what we're doing here. Take some food. Here you go, and keep on your way keep on your travels till you find where you want to be.
Good luck. So what are we donating as donators, or as donors? What are we donating?
Land.
Pardon me?
Land.
Land.
We're donating. As donors, we're donating land.
Yes, the corporeal hereditament is only land, and the monarchy holds the land. Incorporeal hereditaments are all the waste that the fee simple do that's against their inheritance. So everybody in fee simple, they're actually not allowed to cut the ground. I should say, dig the ground, cut the trees, or anything, because it's not theirs. So that's why it's called waste, right? And that's all the incorporeal hereditaments, and that's all the things that everybody signs and gets titles for. So they're becoming trustees of everything that's attached to the lands. because you can never have ownership of the lands, and you can never have ownership of the things from the lands, because you see what I'm getting at. So by her assuming ownership of the lands, everything that you do with the lands is hers as well, right? And it's in trust for you as the donor, right? Because you got to remember, you as donor is A, the monarchy is B, the monarchy created C, which can't take things in trust from B, right? And it should not take anything in trust from anybody else, right? Then A has to become D and volunteer to C and grant those things that D takes in trust from B and has to grant them in trust to C. See, so they're all trust agreements inside trust agreements inside trust agreements, where in all reality, all we have to do is stop, right? Because it's like, look at it as you're working for the company and they give you a truck and tools, right? Before you can quit your job, you have to take the truck and tools back, right?
Yes.
So that's basically what's happening. People are going into court and saying, you have no jurisdiction over me, right? So because they're not deforced, because deforced is giving back the tools and everything else and being without anything whatsoever now. Right now you're out. You're now, because you don't hold those things. Now you're in your natural capacity, and now that's an injury because it's actually yours. So they're not allowed to say you can't have your lands that you claim, right? Because the corporate person's the acceptance of that land tenure that each parent grants at birth that we never agreed to, but we agreed to as soon as we come of age and take a title by purchase, which is fulfillment, right? Joining the feud. Right, agreeing that we've been seized from our lands and we're okay with it, and we're just going to take titles by purchase and be your subject, just to get those services and everything else. When those services you can have when you're out anyway, you just need to write a writ of waste for them.
Okay.
I'm just going to bring this back in now. We've got 20 minutes on there for the agreements between men. Is there anything else you want to add before I finalise this clip?
Anybody have any questions? Make sure you guys speak up, eh? Like right away. Don't be shy or nothing like that. Even, right? Just jump right in there and tell us, hey, I want to say something. So.